Do you know the difference between a message that generates attraction and one that completely destroys it? One misplaced word can be the difference between someone seeing you as irresistible or desperate. If you keep making these mistakes when writing messages, you're sabotaging your own magnetism without realizing it. And by the end of this video, you'll master the art of written communication in a way that will completely transform how people respond to you. Most people have no idea that every message they send is communicating much more than they think. Strauss, master of seduction and author of works that have revolutionized human relationships, discovered something fascinating during his years of research. It's not what you say that generates attraction, but what you don't say. And when it comes to text messages, this principle becomes even more powerful because every word is recorded, every pause is felt, and every decision you make while writing reveals exactly what kind of person you are. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people destroy their attraction before it even begins, and it all happens in those little blue and gray rectangles of their conversations. Every desperate message, every unnecessary explanation, every attempt to impress is screaming one thing: neediness. And neediness, as Strauss always said, is the #1 killer of attraction. But relax, because if you've made it this far, it's because there's something in you that already senses you can be different. That you can be that person whose words generate curiosity instead of annoyance, interest instead of rejection, and above all, respect instead of pity. And when you finish watching this video, you'll understand exactly why some messages create instant chemistry while others make people run away. The first mistake that's killing your attraction is something most people do without realizing it, and it's the most dangerous of all because it seems harmless: responding immediately to every message. Think about it for a second. Every time your phone buzzes and you rush to respond like it's an emergency, you're sending a clear signal. You have nothing more important to do in your life than be available for that conversation. Strauss talked about something called the abundance frame versus the scarcity frame. A person with an abundance mindset has so many options, so many interesting things happening in their life that they can't be available 24 hours for a conversation. A person with a scarcity mindset, on the contrary, treats every message like it's their only opportunity for human connection. What do you think is more attractive? Imagine you're getting to know two people. The first responds to your messages in seconds, no matter what time of day. They're always available, always ready to continue the conversation. The second person responds, but does it on their own terms. Sometimes they take an hour, sometimes 3. When they do, their messages have substance, but they clearly have a life beyond their phone. The difference is brutal. The first person gives you the feeling that they have nothing else to do, that you're the only exciting thing in their world. And while that might seem flattering at first, it quickly becomes unattractive. The second person, however, makes you feel that when they decide to dedicate their time to you, it really means something. Here's an exercise that's going to change your game immediately. For the next 7 days, don't respond to any message immediately, no matter how tempting it is, no matter how urgent it seems. Take at least 30 minutes before responding to any message that isn't a real emergency. And if it's a real emergency, better call by phone. You're going to notice something interesting. At first, you'll feel anxiety. Your brain will tell you that if you don't respond right now, the other person will think you don't care. But here's the paradox. When you start taking your time, people start valuing your responses more. Your words acquire weight because you don't give them away so easily. Repeat this phrase every time you feel the urge to respond immediately. My time is valuable and my words have weight. Because that's the mindset you need to adopt. You're not a customer service that should be available all the time. You're an interesting person with a rich life, and that's reflected in how you handle your communications. But being patient with your responses is just the beginning. There's something even more destructive that most people do in their messages, and we'll talk about that in the next point. The second mistake that's ending your magnetism is over-explaining everything you do, think, or feel. And this is probably the most common of all because we live in a culture that has taught us that communicating is good, that opening our hearts is healthy, that total transparency is the foundation of good relationships. But there's a huge difference between effective communication and verbal diarrhea via text message. Neil Strauss discovered something fascinating during his research on attraction. The most magnetic people aren't those who talk the most, but those who best calibrate how much to reveal and when to do it. In the texting world, this translates to a golden rule. Less is more, always. Every time you send a complete paragraph explaining why you were late, detailing your entire day, or justifying every small decision you make, you're doing something that destroys attraction. You're eliminating mystery. And without mystery, there's no intrigue. Without intrigue, there's no desire to know more about you. Think about the last time someone told you an entire movie, including the ending, before you saw it. What happened to your interest? Exactly, it disappeared. The same thing happens when you over-explain your life in text messages. You take away the other person's opportunity to feel curious about you. Here's an everyday example of how this ruins conversations. Imagine you agreed to meet someone and you arrive 15 minutes late. The average person sends something like, "Sorry for being late. I left home and realized I had forgotten my keys, so I had to go back, but when I got there I remembered I had left them on the kitchen table. Not in my room like I thought. And then traffic was terrible because it seems there was an accident on the main avenue, and on top of that GPS took me on a longer route than normal. I'm almost there, sorry again, I hope I didn't make you wait too long." Do you feel the desperation in that message? Do you feel the need for approval? Now imagine this. "Sorry for the delay, almost there. Period. Nothing more." The difference is that the first message communicates anxiety, need for justification, fear of judgment. The second communicates security, respect for the other person's time, but without the desperate need to explain every detail of your life. Strauss always talked about the concept of investing less than you receive. This doesn't mean being cold or calculating. It means understanding that when you invest emotionally more than the other person is investing, you automatically change the power dynamic and not in your favor. Here's the exercise for next week. Before sending any message, ask yourself this: am I explaining more than necessary? If the answer is yes, cut your message in half, literally. Take what you were going to write and eliminate everything that isn't absolutely essential to communicate your point. You're going to discover something surprising. Your messages are going to become more powerful, not less. People are going to start paying more attention to you because your words will have density. They won't have to filter through paragraphs of unnecessary information to get to the important point. And here's the psychological key. When you give less information than people expect, their brain automatically starts working to fill in the empty spaces. And when their brain is working to understand you, they're thinking about you. And when they're thinking about you, they're developing interest. Has it ever happened to you that someone tells you something halfway and you can't get it out of your head until you know the rest of the story? That's exactly the dynamic you want to create with your messages. Don't give all the information at once. Keep some mystery, something that sparks curiosity. But reducing the amount of information you share is only part of the equation. There's something even more subtle that's sabotaging your attraction, and most people don't even realize they're doing it, and we'll talk about that in the next point. The third mistake that's destroying your magnetism is using too many questions in a row and turning every conversation into an interrogation. And this one is especially treacherous because it seems like you're being interested in the other person, that you care about getting to know them better, that you're being a good conversationalist. But the reality is very different. Neil Strauss observed that the most attractive people in conversations aren't those who ask the most questions, but those who best create balance between showing interest and projecting their own personality. When you bombard someone with questions, especially via text message, you're doing two destructive things. First, you're putting all the pressure on the other person to keep the conversation alive. And second, you're positioning yourself as someone who has nothing interesting to contribute. Think about it from this perspective. How do you feel when someone asks you 5 questions in a row via message? How was your day? What plans do you have for the weekend? Have you seen any good series lately? Do you like to travel? What's been your favorite trip? You feel like you're in a job interview, right? The problem with this approach is that it eliminates the natural flow of conversation. In a face-to-face chat, Questions would arise organically, interspersed with comments, anecdotes, opinions. But via text message, when you fire question after question, it sounds mechanical, desperate, like you're following a manual on how to be interesting. Strauss always talked about something called push and pull. In the context of messages, this means that sometimes you give information about yourself, push, and sometimes you invite the other person to share, pull. The problem arises when you only pull, when you only extract, when your complete strategy is based on extracting information from the other person without giving anything in return. Here's an example of how to transform an interrogation into magnetic conversation. Instead of writing, "How was your day? Did you do anything interesting?" Try something like, "Just saw a guy at the coffee shop trying to impress a woman by explaining his theory about why black coffee is superior to cappuccino. Her face was priceless." Period. You don't ask anything, but you just opened 3 possible conversation threads: coffee shops, awkward dates, and ridiculous theories about coffee. Do you see the difference? Instead of putting the other person in the position of having to generate content for you, you generated the content. You gave them something they could respond to, something they could comment on, something they could use to share a similar experience. You took control of the conversation's direction instead of leaving it in their hands. The exercise for the next few days is this. For every question you want to ask, first share something about yourself. If you want to know what music someone likes, first mention a song you just heard or a musical experience you had. If you want to know about their weekend plans, first mention something interesting you're going to do or an observation about weekends in general. The formula is simple. Statement plus optional invitation. Instead of, "What plans do you have for tonight?" try, "I'm deciding between staying in to watch a movie I've been putting off for weeks or going out to walk downtown to see what adventures I find." It's not a direct question, but it invites response. And if the person wants to share their plans, they'll do it naturally. Repeat this phrase when you feel the temptation to ask question after question. First, I share, then I invite. Because that's the mindset of someone who has interesting things to say, not just curiosity to hear others. But even when you manage to balance questions with interesting statements, there's another mistake that can ruin all your progress instantly. It's something that makes everything else feel fake, and we'll talk about that in the next point. The 4th mistake that's killing your attraction is trying too hard to be funny in every message, especially using excessive emojis and trying to turn every conversation into a comedy show. And this mistake is particularly dangerous because genuine humor is incredibly attractive, but forced humor is repulsive. Neil Strauss discovered something crucial about humor in seduction. It's not the quantity of jokes that matters, but the confidence with which you deliver them. And in the texting world, this gets complicated because you don't have the benefit of tone of voice, facial expressions, or natural timing. Every ha 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 ha, every laughing emoji, every attempt to be the funny guy feels magnified and, frequently, desperate. The fundamental problem is that when you try too hard to be funny, you're revealing a deep need for approval. You're saying without words that you need the other person to validate you by laughing at your jokes. And that need for validation is exactly the opposite of the confidence that generates attraction. Think about the most charismatic people you know. Are they constantly trying to make you laugh? Probably not. Their humor arises naturally, effortlessly, and frequently is more subtle than obvious. They don't need you to laugh to feel good about themselves. Here's an example of how forced humor ruins a conversation. Imagine someone tells you they had a bad day at work, and you respond, "Oh no, did your boss wake up on the wrong side of the bed again? You should put laxatives in his coffee. Ha 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 ha. Or better yet, you should look for another job at the circus because your office already looks like one." Do you feel the desperation in that message? Do you feel how it's trying too hard? Now compare it to this. Mondays should come with workplace hazard warnings. Period. It's a slightly funny comment, but it's not screaming for you to laugh. It acknowledges the situation without minimizing it, and maintains a light tone without becoming a spectacle. Strauss always talked about the importance of authenticity. Authentic humor arises from genuine observations about life, not from the need to entertain others. When your humor comes from the desire to be validated, it feels fake. When it comes from your genuine perspective on the world, it feels natural and attractive. The exercise for this week is simple but powerful. Before sending any message you think is funny, ask yourself, am I sending this because it genuinely amuses me, or because I need the other person to think I'm funny? If it's the latter, reformulate the message. Also, establish a rule. No more than one emoji per message, and only if it really adds value to what you're communicating. Emojis should be like condiments in food. A little can improve the flavor, but too much ruins the entire dish. Here's the truth about humor in text messages. It's better to be genuine and occasionally funny than to be constantly entertaining and never authentic. People are attracted to authenticity, not to clowns. And when your humor arises naturally from your personality, without the desperate need to get laughs, it becomes much more powerful. You know what's really funny? The person who can make an intelligent comment without needing to finish it with 5 laughing emojis. The person who can be ironic without explaining they're being ironic. The person who trusts their own sense of humor enough to not need external confirmation that they're funny. Repeat this when you feel the temptation to overact your humor. My natural humor is enough. Because it is. You don't need to be the main entertainment of every conversation. Sometimes being genuinely interesting is much more attractive than being artificially funny. But there's one last mistake, the most subtle of all, that can destroy even conversations that seem to be going perfectly well, and we'll talk about that in the next point. The 5th and most devastating mistake that's ending your magnetism is something most people do without realizing it, especially when they feel the conversation is going well, revealing too much about your feelings and intentions too soon. This is the mistake that transforms promising conversations into uncomfortable situations in a matter of seconds. Neil Strauss developed a fundamental concept in his research. Emotional escalation must be gradual and reciprocal. When you reveal too much of your feelings too quickly, especially via text message, you create an imbalance that makes the other person feel pressured or even overwhelmed, and pressure is the mortal enemy of attraction. Here's the problem. We live in a culture that tells us expressing our feelings is always good, that emotional honesty is the foundation of healthy relationships. And that's true in established relationships, but when you're just getting to know someone, bombarding with emotional intensity generates the opposite effect of what you're looking for. Think of this like a dance. In a dance, if one person takes 3 steps forward while the other is barely taking half a step, the dance breaks. The same happens with emotional intimacy in conversations. There must be balance, rhythm, natural progression. The most common example of this mistake is when someone, after a few pleasant conversations, sends something like, "I have to tell you that I really enjoy talking to you. It's been a long time since I met someone who made me feel this way. I feel like we have a very special connection, and I'm excited to see where this can lead. You've been on my mind all day, and I can't stop smiling when I think about our conversations." Do you feel the intensity? Do you feel how that message, although it comes from a genuine place, can make the other person feel overwhelmed? It's too much too soon. And what's worse, it doesn't give the other person space to develop their own feelings at their own pace. Strauss always talked about the importance of maintaining a bit of mystery about your intentions. Not because you're manipulative, but because it allows attraction to develop naturally. When you put all your cards on the table too soon, you eliminate sexual tension, the intriguing uncertainty that keeps people interested. Instead of declaring your intense feelings, try something like, "This conversation definitely wasn't what I expected when the day started." It's a subtle acknowledgement that something interesting is happening, but without the overwhelming intensity. It leaves space for the other person to feel curious, to wonder exactly what you mean by that. The exercise for the next few days is crucial. Before sending any message that reveals your feelings or intentions, ask yourself these 3 questions. Am I sharing this because I need validation, or because it genuinely improves the conversation? Am I giving the other person space to develop their own feelings? Am I creating pressure, or am I creating intrigue? If your answers reveal that you're seeking validation, creating pressure, or not giving emotional space, reformulate your message. Find a more subtle, more elegant way to communicate what you feel without bombarding with intensity. Here's the beautiful paradox of attraction. When you stop needing so much for the other person to feel the same as you, when you stop pushing for immediate emotional reciprocity, you frequently get exactly what you were looking for. But you get it naturally, organically, without the forced feeling that comes from desperate need. Repeat this phrase when you feel the urge to reveal too much. Tension is more attractive than certainty, because it's true. A bit of mystery about your intentions, a bit of space for the other person to wonder what you really feel, keeps the conversation exciting. Have you noticed that the most magnetic people never seem to need anything from you? They don't need you to confirm you find them interesting. They don't need you to validate their feelings. They don't need you to assure them you want to keep talking to them. And that lack of need is precisely what makes them irresistible. When you can converse with someone, genuinely enjoy the interaction, but without the desperate need for it to become something more immediately, you project a security that's magnetic. People are attracted to that emotional stability, to that ability to be present without hidden agenda. Now that you understand these 5 fundamental mistakes that are sabotaging your attraction in text messages, there's something crucial you need to understand about how all this connects and why it works. The truth is that all these mistakes have a common root: neediness. Need to respond immediately, need to explain everything, need to keep the conversation alive with constant questions, need to be validated through humor, need for immediate emotional reciprocity. And Neil Strauss discovered something fundamental in all his research: neediness repels, abundance attracts. When your messages come from a place of abundance, personal security, genuine interest without desperate agenda, they feel completely different. They feel magnetic. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to converse with someone who has integrated these principles. Their messages arrive when they arrive, without desperate rush. They say what's necessary, without over-explaining. They contribute value to the conversation instead of just extracting it. Their humor arises naturally, without need for constant validation. And their feelings are revealed gradually, creating intrigue instead of pressure. Doesn't that seem like a much more interesting person to get to know? Don't you feel like you'd want to know more about someone like that? That can be exactly the energy you project in your own conversations. But it requires a fundamental change in your mindset. It requires you to stop seeing every conversation as an opportunity you could lose if you don't act perfectly, and start seeing it as an opportunity to express your authentic personality without needing specific results. When you really internalize these principles, something magical happens. You stop feeling anxiety about every message you send because you're no longer betting all your personal worth on every response you receive. Your conversations become more relaxed, more natural, more genuine, and people feel it. You know what's most ironic about all this? When you stop needing so desperately for conversations to work, that's exactly when they start working better. When you stop chasing validation, that's when you start receiving it naturally. When you stop forcing connection, that's when real connections start to emerge. But implementing these changes isn't something that happens overnight. It requires conscious practice, self-observation, and the willingness to feel a bit uncomfortable at first while you develop new communication habits. That's why I'm going to give you a specific action plan for the next 30 days. This is your opportunity to completely transform the way you communicate via text message, and as a result, the way people respond to you. Week 1. Focus solely on timed responses. Don't respond to any message immediately. Practice patience. Observe how your internal energy changes when you don't feel the constant urgency to be available to everyone all the time. Week 2. Add the over-explanation filter. Before sending any message, cut it in half. Eliminate all information that isn't absolutely necessary. Practice the power of brevity. Week 3. Implement the statement before question rule. For every question you want to ask, first share something about yourself. Transform interrogations into balanced conversations. Week 4. Integrate everything and add the emotional filter. Before sending any message that reveals feelings or intentions, ask yourself if you're creating intrigue or pressure. And here's your final challenge, the test that you've really internalized these principles. I want you to think about the person you'd most like to improve your communication with. It could be someone new you met, someone you want to reconnect with, or even someone with whom you feel conversations have become boring or predictable. Now imagine what your next conversation with that person would be like if you applied everything you just learned. If you responded from abundance instead of neediness, if you shared enough to be interesting but not so much as to eliminate mystery, if your humor arose naturally instead of being forced, if your feelings were revealed gradually instead of bombarding with intensity. Don't you feel that conversation would be completely different? Don't you feel you'd project completely different energy? That energy, that magnetic presence, that ability to generate intrigue and genuine attraction through your words is available to you right now. You don't need to wait. You don't need more techniques. You don't need more theories. You just need to start implementing these principles in your next conversation. Because here's the final truth that Neil Strauss understood better than anyone. Attraction isn't about tricks or manipulation. It's about becoming the most secure, most authentic, most interesting version of yourself. And when that transformation is reflected in the way you communicate, the results are inevitable. People start responding differently to your messages. Conversations flow more naturally. You generate more interest with less effort. And most importantly, you feel more comfortable being yourself because you're no longer constantly trying to impress or please others. Now it's your moment to decide. You can keep communicating the same way you've been doing, getting the same results you've been getting, or you can take these principles and transform your text message communication into one of your most powerful strengths. The choice is yours, but I'm going to tell you something. The version of you that implements these principles, that communicates from abundance instead of neediness, that generates intrigue instead of pressure, that version deserves to be known by the world. And to demonstrate your commitment to this transformation, I want you to do something right now. In the comments of this video, write, "I choose to communicate from abundance, not from neediness. My authentic energy is enough." Make it public, make it real, commit to this change. Because when you make that decision, when you really commit to communicating differently, everything changes. People feel it, the world responds, and you start attracting exactly the type of connections you've always wanted. If this video opened your eyes to mistakes you've been making without realizing it, share it with someone who could also benefit from this information. Give it a like if it helped you understand something new about yourself. And make sure to subscribe and activate the bell because we're going to keep exploring the secrets of attraction, magnetic communication, and how to become the most powerful version of yourself. Your communication is your power. Use it wisely.